Live, local, and number one. Canterbury Mornings with Chris Lynch. Weekdays from 8:30 to midday on NewstalkZB 100.1 FM.
Well, the Prime Minister, John Key, has gone into bat for the rebuild plans for Christchurch. Yesterday, of course, a $4.8 billion cost-sharing agreement from the government and the City Council was unveiled. We're talking about big-ticket items that include the Crown-funded Convention Centre and a City Council-funded $253 million stadium. The Prime Minister is on the phone and joins me now. Good morning to you.
Morning, how are you?
Very well, thanks. Prime Minister, when will the public of Christchurch actually get a say in all of this, or is this now a done deal?
Well, I think there's been a lot of consultation with Christchurch. I mean, if you think about the CBD blueprint, which is really, this is a lot of what we announced yesterday, is either some of the anchor projects or the repair of the horizontal infrastructure, water and roading, all that sort of stuff, wastewater. And that's been in the public domain for a very long period of time now. I think actually, I pretty much recall the press and others believing it was, overwhelmingly going in the right direction. So, I mean, yes, of course, there'll always be a range of views, and some of the topics down there, like the cathedral or the town hall, will be very hot topics where there'll be individuals that will have a range of views. But for the most part, I think people are broadly supportive of the direction.
I suppose one of the highly controversial anchor projects is the cost of the stadium and a cost to ratepayers of $253 million. Outline to the ratepayers of Christchurch, Mr. Key, the economic benefits of this stadium.
Well, firstly, I think it's important to understand the way this is sort of working at the moment is that the government is essentially doing a deal with Christchurch and saying, look, it's probably easier if you control one project and we control another. So, for instance, we're theoretically controlling 100% of the convention centre. They're controlling, I think, for the most part, the stadium. So essentially the way to think about it is there would actually be some government money in there, but it's been transferred from one asset to the other, and that's really just about easing the process. Secondly, I think you've got to take a step back and say, well, you had a big stadium in Christchurch at AMI, obviously, and that stadium, was important and I think largely very supported. So what's happened is you've got a situation now where through the earthquake you don't have that facility anymore. You do have a temporary facility, but realistically that facility is not going to last forever. It's a 17,000-seater stadium. So the point here is, I think the message coming through from Cantabrians, if I read it right, is they actually do want a stadium. They probably want a higher priority put on repair of houses and roads and a bit of that core infrastructure, and we support them in that. And then ultimately the decision about what shape the stadium takes will actually to a certain degree be in their hands. They'll decide, I think, through the noises that the councillors make and... All right,
sorry, you haven't really answered my question. What are the economic benefits of a stadium?
Well, they're reasonably significant. I mean, firstly, it brings in, obviously the sort of games and events, and that brings a degree of tourism and all of that. But ultimately, stadiums and sporting fixtures and events and facilities are very much like a performing arts. I mean, it's what happens when you live in a major city. And I think if you strip all that out, people say, well, their quality of life dramatically reduces.
So you do accept, though, at the end of the day, and this is what the international research say, let's be honest about it, Mr. Key, there are no economic benefits of a stadium.
Well, I don't think you can actually say there's none, but what I'd say is, if you take a step back, Christchurch is New Zealand's second largest city. If you go to any significant city around the world, they have stadium, and they have many of them often. And the reality is that if you're a Cantabrian living in Christchurch, the surrounding areas, I think it would defy belief or logic that over a period of time they would never want to go to a rugby match.
But you still haven't outlined for me what the economic benefits of a stadium are. I think the argument really has to move on from the feel-good factor of the Crusaders playing a game to what we can actually afford in a broken city.
Well, firstly, I mean, if you take the broken city argument, I mean, the government is putting in $15 billion worth of taxpayers' funds. The insurance payout on the city is very, very significant as well. So, yes, it's $40 billion, but I don't think anyone's seriously asking Cantabrians to actually front up and pay for the bulk of either what's required or what would be nice to have. Actually, that's being paid for out of the general tax base, and rightfully so, because as New Zealanders, we should support an area of the country which is in need through no fault of their own. But I mean, realistically, I don't think for a moment are you really suggesting that we go out there, build a few houses, build a few roads and water infrastructure, and then can everything else that actually may not have the strongest economic argument, but it's not there solely for economics, but would substantially reduce the quality of living. Well, I think you're out to lunch if you seriously think we shouldn't have a convention centre, a performing arts centre, museums and sporting facilities. You're mad.
Well, I suppose if you say museums, the difference there, Mr. Kerr, is museums used every day by the general public, and I put it to you, convention centres and stadiums are not used every day on a daily basis by members of the public. But I want to move on.
A convention centre earns about $318 for every tourist that comes, the more convention goer, compared to $208. I mean, there's a huge amount of people in Christchurch that were previously employed in tourism and convention-type areas. Go down and look at any hotel.
But let's be honest, we're talking low-wage economy. We're not talking the most sexiest of jobs, to be fair. I need to move on. The government says it's putting in $481 million for the frame. Isn't this really about land banking? I mean, money that is going to be spent on property, then flicked off to private investors. So effectively, the Crown stands to gain, doesn't it?
Well, it may gain in some areas because it's obviously not sensible for the Crown to continue to own all of that land in totality and forever. But what is happening is we need to control all of the land to control the rollout and the development. And, that's what's going to make it look fantastic and be, the most livable sort of city with this great CBD is because you've got, coordination there. And so in the first instance, we need to control the land. Then yes, of course, by definition, we'll sell some of that off, not all of it, some, and yes, we may either recoup our purchases or even make some money on that. But I mean, overall, I don't think there's an argument that can put up that says the Crown's making money on Christchurch. As I said, we're sitting at the moment saying the net cost is probably about $15 billion, and I can't even rule out that rising from there. So this isn't a money-making exercise for the government. Let
me get this right. You're essentially restricting land in the CBD, which means higher prices for those who want to work or live there. So who will really benefit from living in an affordable, livable city, central city?
Well, firstly, it's a defined piece of land, right? So one of the issues is if you have very cheap land there, you possibly get very cheap buildings. Now, in the long run, there may be a strong argument from contemporaries that's not the kind of development they want taking place in their CBD, which is going to have this sort of, magnificent sort of area. Now, in Auckland, where they've done a bit of that, and there's been very cheap apartments, actually, that generally people have resisted all that, and they certainly haven't thought that they've been an addition to the CBD. I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be a range of housing there. Of course, there should be, but that is certainly an argument about the sort of type of development you want taking place there, because there'll be a range of budgets. But look, it's not going to be for everybody to live in the CBD. Not everyone's going to want to live there or be able to afford to do that, accept that. But it's one small part of Christchurch.
Prime Minister, the government appears to be controlling most of the anchor projects. Why is the government running the show when the council is spending so much money on the projects?
I don't know if that's really correct. I mean, if you think about the development of the plan, it was done hand in hand with Christchurch. Secondly, the payment of all this is sort of something that's been worked out between the two parties. But you've got to remember, a lot of what Christchurch puts in is actually the insurance payouts that they get from the previous assets that were destroyed as a result of the earthquake. So, I mean,
well, the whole city was so far underinsured, it's going to be a little bit troubling for the council, isn't it?
In part, but I mean, that's the reason why the government's actually having to step up with, say, the better part of $15 billion, because in the end, if we turned around and said to the Christchurch ratepayer and contemporaries, well, look, this is lovely, but you're on your own, then that would be ridiculous. I mean, they could never restore the city to the point it needs to be rebuilt to, and secondly, it would bankrupt them. I mean, it's not feasible in terms of a rate base. What we're trying to do here is say, look, we're putting the city back together again. Of course, we're taking the opportunity for it to be better. Yes, some decisions will need to be made around what you need, but it comes back to the stadium. I mean, in the end, I might have a view on what I think the stadium should look like and what the mix of, for instance, assets or rating or debt that Christchurch might have. But in the end, it's for contemporaries who vote for the council that get to make those decisions, not me as Prime Minister.
Prime Minister John Key, really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for fronting up on the program.
No No problem. Thanks very much. All the best.
What can you do on the new ZB iPhone app?
Puts my socks into pairs for me, gets my child dressed in the morning.
Wax my surfboard for me.
I love how it cooks dinner for me, just like in the Jetsons.
And wait till you see the real whizzy stuff.
A little man jumps out of my iPhone and does my housework.
So keep up with your favourite radio station. Available now on iPhone and Android. Newstalk ZB. Thanks to launch partner Harcourts. Global.